Welcome to the 9th AVO webinar. This one is called Should You Eat with Non-Vegans? It is one of the most controversial and sometimes even most interesting topics that I've encountered throughout my travels around the world and meeting a lot of different activists and vegans. So this is a topic that I had to think about a lot, and I'm excited to talk about what I've learned. I put together a little presentation for you guys about the history of the pledge, where it came from. We're going to talk about how I discovered it and just the way that I think about it, which might be a little bit unique to some other people's. And then we'll talk about how to talk about the pledge for those of you who either have taken it or are thinking about taking it. And for those of you who have no idea what I'm even talking about, we're going to talk about what the Liberation Pledge is. My name's Alex. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder of Amazing Vegan Outreach, AVO, which is a nonprofit organization focused on providing professional learning and development opportunities for animal rights activists. So I focus primarily on communication and vegan advocacy, so how to talk to people about veganism, how to try and create behavior change, or I should say inspire behavior change in others. And this is the 9th webinar of many. So this one is focused on a very kind of niche topic, this Liberation Pledge, but we're going to definitely focus on the communication aspect of it, which I think is a really important aspect of this pledge. So I'd like to start off with the history of the Liberation Pledge and how it came to be. And it's actually modeled from a different pledge. And this pledge is related to what's called anti-footbinding. Footbinding in China. So as you can see in the picture there in the background, people used to have their feet bound. Well, when I say people, it was actually women. And the reason why, one of the reasons why, was that it was a symbol of status. So typically the upper class would bind women's feet. It was considered a mark of beauty to have small feet. And so it was done in a very unnatural manner by putting these what are called lotus shoes on women's feet ever since they were very young, and they would just grow up with them, and it would really constrict the growth of their foot and really distort the growth of the bones in the feet as well. It was estimated that throughout the 1,000 years that this lasted, so it went from somewhere around the 10th or 11th century up until the 20th century, there was about 40 to 50% of Chinese women at any given time had their feet bound. And it was about 99% or more, so nearly 100% of the upper class had their feet bound. It was just really unheard of to be, a higher class without having this status symbol, kind of like the Mercedes-Benz or the BMW of today, I guess. I don't know. The problem with it, one of the big problems, was that it resulted in limited mobility. So of course, if your feet are significantly bound, it's much more difficult to walk, and it resulted in lifelong disabilities. So these weren't temporary, these were just long-lasting disfigurements of feet. And again, a better view of that, you can see how unnatural these are adult feet here, how unnatural they are, I should say. And here's a photo of what the feet actually looked like when the shoes were taken off the feet. So as you can see, obviously very painful, and although it was completely culturally acceptable. In fact, you were very, I think, weird, and you were looked down on if you didn't participate in this. You can see how it was definitely a form of violence against women, forcing them, culturally forcing them to do this to themselves, to their feet. So, really horrible. So the End of Footbinding is an interesting story, how that came about, because this was completely ingrained into Chinese culture, generation after generation. It's just how things were. And there were multiple attempts to put an end to footbinding. Remember, this went on for 1,000 years. So of course, not everybody would have been on board. There would have been a small portion of people who were probably consistently against it, but because it was just so widespread, it was very, very difficult, to the point where there was even an emperor who tried to end this in the 17th century and was unsuccessful. So imagine an emperor, the person leading the country, being opposed to this, so opposed to it that they tried to pass, laws that would basically put an end to this, and the population was so I guess indoctrinated. So this was such a strong part of their culture that he wasn't able to even do that in the 17th century. It wasn't until the early 20th century that there was a dramatic shift in this cultural practice. And it started with this grassroots anti-footbinding campaign. So it was people who were strongly opposed to it, and they did something that ended this in a very, very short period of time relative to how long it had been going on. And it was something called the Anti-Footbinding Pledge. So what people started doing, again, this was at a grassroots level. These were just people who lived in communities who were, strongly opposed to it. They made a public pledge, and they started encouraging other people to do this. One is if they had a daughter, they publicly pledged to never bind their daughter's feet. And the second part of the pledge was if people had sons in their families, they also publicly pledged to refuse their sons to allow them to marry women who had bound feet. Okay, and I forget the exact number. It's maybe hard to gauge, but it was within about a generation or two that this pledge just spread like wildfire, and essentially it put an end to foot binding in China. This leads us to the Liberation Pledge. So the Liberation Pledge, for anyone who isn't overly familiar with it, is a very bold and I think what can be considered radical or extreme position, especially when it comes to society in general. But I think it even applies within the vegan community. Within the vegan community, it's still considered as very radical. And even within the activist community, I'm sure that most activists around the world have not taken the Liberation Pledge. So I'm going to share a little bit about this. And first, I'll share what the actual pledge is. So the Liberation Pledge is three things. The first thing is to publicly refuse to eat animals. So in other words, to live vegan. The second one is to publicly refuse to sit where animals are being eaten. And the third step of the Liberation Pledge is to encourage others to take this pledge. A lot of people, I think, have some ideas. If they've heard about the pledge, they've kind of started making up their own minds. I know when I first heard about the pledge, I was quite opposed to it. I had some, what I thought, and I still think are somewhat legitimate concerns about the pledge. But I want to focus first on why people do take the pledge and why people have decided to take the pledge. And there's a lot of people that have been taking it over the last, at least the last year, maybe a year and a half that I've been traveling around. I've noticed that it's been introduced to a lot of communities around the world, and a lot of people are really embracing it and doing their best to live it. So here's why people have taken the pledge, and then we'll talk about challenges in a second. But I think that the pledge is a very clear stand against injustice, against this injustice that we know to be speciesism. It is an opposition, and again, a very clear opposition to what is a cruel and violent system, which is often hidden, and often people don't, this system doesn't come to their conscious minds. I think people, if you really ask them to think about it, sure, they know that there's some violence involved. Maybe they're not aware to the full extent of how bad it is. But either way, it is a clear opposition to that system. I think it's a way to demonstrate respect for the victims of violence and for those of us who have had the opportunity or who have created the opportunity, let's say, for ourselves to meet those victims, whether it's by going to a slaughterhouse, going inside of a slaughterhouse, maybe going to a factory farm, maybe even going to a place where those victims have been rescued. Maybe it's going to a sanctuary. But if you've met individuals who were or are trapped in this system, I think that there's this desire that we all feel to do something about it, and this is one way to show some respect for the plight that they're in. It's another way to show solidarity with other vegans and other activists who strongly oppose violence. I believe that it is a very ethically consistent stance to take against speciesism. And one thing that I also really, really like about this pledge is that it is disruptive, which is probably what makes it the most challenging. I think the more disruptive the form of activism, the more challenging it is for ourselves, the more courage it takes to actually do that. So I really, really like the fact that we are, interrupting in a way. We have to interrupt how normal it is for people to sit down at the table and consume the body parts of these individuals who suffered greatly, and at the very least, who were killed unnecessarily. I'd also like to go back to the point of being ethically consistent, because I know that, well, let me give you my thought process as to how I thought about this when I first started considering the pledge and when I first started kind of living this way. And it was based on a concept that I think most of us are very familiar with. And it's a concept that we often use when we talk to non-vegans about the ethics, the morality of eating pigs or cows or chickens. And I think the concept that we constantly bring up is, why love one but eat the other, right? There have actually been really big marketing campaigns with this slogan. The Save movement used this a lot. There was subway ads that were put up. I've seen billboards that have gone up with this, bus ads, that sort of thing. And it's a really powerful question, right? What is it that makes us love one individual, a dog, a cat, or any of the animals that we consider family members, and then other individuals who have the same exact capacity to suffer, to feel, we treat them like objects, and we torture and brutalize them, enslave them, and kill them for what usually is what boils down to taste, pleasure, culture, tradition, that sort of thing. So I had to think of, if someone were to invite me to a barbecue where they had, let's say they were going to cook this dog, any dog, and I thought to myself, this dog that I rescued, Kona, from the Humane Society, I thought, well, if someone wanted to cook Kona and put her on a barbecue and invite me over, and they said, listen, but you can come over and we'll save a separate part of the grill for veggie burgers, and we'll cook you some veggie burgers, and we can all have a good time together, would I be keen to go to that barbecue? Would I go and basically hang out with people while they were eating, any dog? And my answer was a very clear no. I wouldn't feel comfortable with that at all. I would think that would be supporting, massive injustice and cruelty. And it's like, well, then what's the difference between a dog and a pig, right? Which is the same question that we ask non-vegans. What's the difference? And so I think that this concept, the concept of being ethically consistent, is not very hard for people to grasp. And if you have questions about it, throw it into the Q&A section. However, I think most people can wrap their heads around the fact that if we aren't willing to go and sit down with people eating dogs or cats, we shouldn't be sitting there with pigs or cows or chickens. However, then we have to think about this, the idea between being right and being effective. And for me and my activism, I am all about being effective over being right. For anyone who's seen other webinars or been to the Mastering Vegan Outreach workshop, I talk about this, and I talk about the ability to choose what language we use when we're talking to non-vegans. And often there's certain language that we can use which would be considered right, it'd be considered logical and correct, but it might not be the most effective language to use and the best way maybe to communicate the message so that people aren't defensive and so that they're willing to at least think about this and so that we're able to inspire different way of thinking and hopefully some new actions and some behavior change that results hopefully in them, at least seeing the main reasons why people want to go vegan, right? And why they might want to consider veganism. So when it came to this, I was like, okay, well, it makes sense, right? It's ethically correct to do this, and I want to be ethically correct. But if I'm going to be doing the animals a big disservice by living the pledge, then I really want to consider this because I want to be more effective. And I think that, and you guys can definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the majority of people who don't take the pledge or who are hesitant to take the pledge do so or don't do so for two main reasons. And one of them is It is first extremely, extremely uncomfortable to do because we're more radical, we're more extreme, right? I mean, it's already extreme enough to be vegan in this society. And then, think of the number of vegans. What subset of that are actually activists, regular activists, very, very small percentage of those. So that's even weirder, right? I know vegans who aren't active kind of look like, I would never want to do that. I wouldn't want to be one of those people. So that's already weird enough. And then from those people, people that take this pledge and then won't even sit at the same table where animals' bodies are being consumed, that's even more weird, right? So it's just like, we don't like being weird as individuals. We like belonging. So that's the one thing. The second thing, I think, and I've heard this a lot, is that people are concerned that they're going to lose out on opportunities to speak to others about veganism and speciesism. And that often can happen at a dinner table, right? Where people are eating animals and you aren't. And so there's this curiosity about why aren't you eating the way we're eating? And then boom, a conversation strikes up, right? And so I thought about these things as well. I started living the pledge January 1st, 2017. So it's been just over 2 years now. And I was concerned that I was going to lose out on opportunities to defend non-human animals. And what I realized was that by living this pledge and by always challenging myself to publicly refuse to eat animals and to publicly refuse to sit at the same tables where animals were being eaten, I wasn't losing opportunities to talk about speciesism. In fact, I think I was creating more effective ways of creating opportunities to do that, So when I realized that, starting January 1st, 2017, when I started realizing that I was actually being kind of encouraged by myself, by this pledge, to talk about this way more often. And I was able to do that in a really authentic way. And that's really important. And we're going to talk about how to talk about this. But because I was able to do that, people's reactions to this weren't as extreme or as negative as I thought they were going to be. And I know that people always fear extremely negative reactions when you go and you tell someone, you know what, I'm not going to eat with you because of this. And so communication is really, really key when it comes to this pledge. And I hope that for anyone who sees this webinar, whether it's live or online after the fact, I hope that I can try to provide some tools for you in this webinar to help bridge the gap that people have between the effectiveness of the pledge and the fact that it's correct. So I think most people agree that it makes sense ethically to do it, but the effectiveness is the one that usually gets lost, or what I would say is maybe misperceived, that it's far less effective than not taking it. So here we go. Let's talk about communication and how to talk about the pledge. I think the first thing that we should consider when thinking about how to talk about the pledge is, what is the goal of communicating this pledge to others? So what am I trying to achieve when I challenge myself and regularly talk about the fact that I won't join people for a meal where animals' bodies or secretions are being served? And for me, the goal is, I might have a few goals, but I think the main goal for me is that I'm trying to clearly communicate to others how I feel about speciesism, right? And we always try to do that. I think we're always trying to do that, right? To let other people understand how we feel. However, I think that one of the challenges in doing that, and it's at a subconscious level for most people, I think, but when our actions don't align with our words, it's harder for people to believe what we're saying, and maybe it's not quite believe, but it's like fully absorb. Maybe that's a better way to say it. So fully absorb what we're saying. And if I'm truly against something, right? Could I possibly say, you know what, I'm against rodeos, but then go to the rodeo and pay for a ticket and go in there and participate in it? Well, if I tell people about it, hey, yeah, you know what? I'm against rodeos. They're really, really bad. And they're like, yeah, but you just went to the rodeo last week. And I'm like, yeah, but don't worry about that. They're still very bad. Well, it's not going to have the same impact as if I boycott rodeos, right? So this is the same idea where our actions are fully aligning to what it is that we're talking about, right? If this is actually so bad, and if it impacts us so strongly, then how can we possibly participate in it, right? And I know that we're not actually cooking, the animals' bodies, or we're not actually consuming them, but there's an idea of like silence is complicity, right? And if you aren't, if you aren't saying something, if you see an injustice happening and you don't do anything about it, it's kind of a way of condoning it, right? Maybe we can go deeper into that, but in general, I think that most people would agree with that. The same idea where if you saw someone beating a dog on the street, right? What would you do? Would you say something or would you not? That example is used a lot for the idea that it's kind of in our core nature to be activists, right? To actually say something, because most people would not just walk by and be like, well, at least I don't beat dogs. So it's in our core nature to be activists, and I think it's in our core nature not to participate in things that we're against, yet I think we feel this really, really strong cultural and societal pressure, even though we're vegan, even though we may be activists, to participate in those meals, right? It's strong. The pressure's really strong. And so it takes a lot of courage to do this. But I think the main reason why I do this is to make sure that my message is clear and consistent, that if I'm opposed to something, I'm not going to participate in it. Or if I did participate in it, if I sat at the table, I don't want to have to be, I kind of realized that I don't want to have to be the person who's always talking about this, always bringing this up, always making people feel, guilty that they're eating animal products while they're in the middle of eating animal products. It's a really challenging conversation. And, when I've talked about this in person with a lot of people, I've always asked them, how many times have you been sitting at a table while people are eating the bodies of animals? And that person has had this like epiphany at that moment saying, you know what, you're totally right. This is totally wrong. Yeah, this is really bad. I shouldn't be doing this. It doesn't really happen, right? So ideally, well, let's keep going. But that's the main idea behind this goal is I want to communicate effectively. I want to represent speciesism and veganism as best as possible. Now, again, communication really, really comes into this, the way that you communicate it. So here's how we do it. I try to take all of the focus away from others, okay? This isn't about them. It's not about their conditioning into speciesism. It's not about the fact that they're not vegan. This is about a decision that I've made for reasons and experiences that I've had. So I'm going to share that with people, okay? I'm going to share with people what my personal story is with, maybe going vegan, becoming an activist, things that I've seen. I want to talk about my experience with violence against non-human animals, okay? I want to share that with people. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out story, but people do need to understand what makes it so difficult for me to participate in this meal, right? Ethically, emotionally, psychologically. There's a lot of problems, right? I know a lot of vegans and I know a lot of activists struggle from a personal perspective, just from seeing these, a piece of meat on a plate beside you. To you, it's not just a piece of meat, right? You actually are completely aware of what that animal went through, what they suffered through. Sometimes you might even have flashbacks of videos you've seen, documentaries, or real life examples of what you've seen happening to animals. So it's traumatic and it's fine. Like that's totally normal for that to be the case. And I share that with people, what my experiences with violence is and what I see when I see these animal products, what I think about. I want to talk about, how I feel in that moment when I'm around and when I feel kind of obligated to be around these products, which are a result of that violence. And I really, really want to focus on the relationship that I have with the people that I'm talking to, the people that I'm telling, why I'm not comfortable in these situations where animal products are being served. I want to focus on how much I care about them, how much I love them. I want to focus on things like how I want to enjoy my time when I'm with them, yet I'm struggling to do that when I'm fighting this internal struggle when animal products are around, right? And I'm suffering actually. But that's all because I want to make sure that the relationship that I have with this person is a good one, that I only associate it with positive thoughts, and that the time we spend together is positive and happy for both of us. I want to make sure also, and this is a bit of a misperception, I think, from what I've heard about the Liberation Pledge, is that the Liberation Pledge is inclusive. It's meant to invite people to join you and to include people in meals that are not focused and centered around these products of violence, right? So to join you for vegan meals. It's not meant, and at least this is the way I perceive it, it's not meant for you to simply exclude yourself from these events and just like not show up, you know? So someone has, let's say, a wedding, and you're like, oh, you know what, I'm just not gonna go because there's gonna be animal products there, and that's it. You know, I've kind of lived the pledge, done. That's not what it is, because I don't know how effective that is necessarily. The point, and if you think back to the 3 steps of the Liberation Pledge, the fact that it's publicly refused and publicly refused to eat animals, publicly refused to sit at the same table where animals are being served. The word publicly is the key part to all of this. That you have to tell people what it is that's stopping you from attending these events. And more importantly, before you say, like, I'm just not going to go, it's like invite them to offer, you know, an event or a meal, or to join you at a restaurant that's vegan, that doesn't have victims for that meal, you know? Now, that being said, of course, some people will join you, and more people will join you than you think. I promise you that, and those of you who've taken the pledge will probably recognize that. However, there will definitely be people who will not join you, right? Now, the way I look at it is they are choosing to exclude me, right? Because imagine if you said to someone, hey, you know what, I have a really, really strong, deathly peanut allergy, right? And if I go and have dinner, can you make sure that there's no peanuts in the meal? And they say to you, you know what, I'm sorry, I really love peanuts. I can't have a meal without peanuts, so we're gonna have to have peanuts, you know? Well, who is excluding who in that scenario, right? And I honestly don't see a difference between those two. I don't. I know one is a limitation that you have, a physiological limitation, or whatever that is. With this one, yeah, it's not as strong. You're not going to die, but if you're going to suffer and if you're going to be miserable, and if it's just not going to be, you know, an experience that you're going to enjoy, then why should you be constantly forced to do that? And if someone doesn't recognize that, then that's them excluding you, okay? And despite the fact that I've been excluded and I will continue to be excluded from those events, I don't hold it against them. And I make sure that they understand that I understand, you know, that they don't feel, at least that I don't make them feel guilty, or that I don't shame them for not including me, because I understand how difficult it is to break these habits and these traditions that people have, you know? And although, and you know, I'll bet if it was something easy for them, you know, if they were like, oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, that's it. Okay, no problem. Don't put cilantro in the guacamole. You know, if it's that easy, like, okay, well, we'll just make a guacamole without cilantro then, or coriander, I guess, for some people. But yeah, if it's that easy, then maybe they'll do it. But this is like, we're asking people to really like break tradition and break these norms that they have, and some people are better at others at doing that. But anyway, that's the idea behind it being inclusive, not exclusive, and at least not excluding yourself, having others exclude you, if that makes sense. So I want to give you guys an example of how I would talk about the pledge, and then after that we can jump into the question and answer portion. So the way that I would tell, let's say it's a family member. Let's say I have to communicate this pledge to a family member who is not vegan. You know, so let's suppose that I'll use the example of, let's say, my mom not being vegan and me having to explain this to her the first time that, well, you know, shortly after I've taken it. Oh, and by the way, before I start that, one thing that I didn't make a slide about this, but I do want to talk about it, is when to talk about the pledge. So it's really, really important that we choose the right times to talk about the pledge. And from my experience, the right time to talk about the pledge is not 10 minutes before the meal or when the food is brought out to the table, right? I mean, if you can avoid it. Because if you know that you're going to be going to a meal where there are going to be animal products, then the right time to talk about it, I think, is as early as possible, right? When you get that invitation, when you know you're going to go, have a conversation with the organizer, with the host, or with the people involved, and say, guys, listen, and then share that well in advance, so you're not putting people on the spot the day of, because that's way more difficult to accommodate you, right? And then the end goal is you want to invite them to join you in a meal that doesn't involve these animal products, right? So here is how I would. Oh, sorry. And then when it comes to family, the best way, I think, to have this conversation, which is a really important conversation, right? If you've taken this pledge and it's affecting, this is a lifelong pledge for me, right? So this is it's a serious topic. Make sure that it's viewed as a serious conversation. So I would invite let's say I was going to talk to my mom about it. I would take my mom and I would invite her to go grab a coffee or go grab a meal. I would invite her out to dinner, or whatever that looks like. But I would make a specific event, maybe like put it in our calendars, like, hey, what day are you free? I want to take you out. I have something that I really want to share with you. It's something that's really, really important to me. And you're my mom and I want to share that with you. So when can we do that? And actually schedule it in advance so that they're prepared in a way that you want to talk about something important, and it is important. So once I got into that conversation, I would, I'll just kind of free flow, and I'll just talk how I would share this if I were sharing this, let's say with my mom, if she were non-vegan. So I would say, Mom, so first of all, thank you so much for, taking the time to hang out with me, to come to dinner or whatever. I'm really happy we're able to do that. We don't do it enough, which is true. I love you, Mom, if you're watching this. And I wanted to share something with you that is really important to me. It's been something that's been on my mind for a long time. It's probably something that you already have a good idea about, because you know that I've been vegan for whatever it is, let's say 5 years when I took the pledge. So, I've been vegan for 5 years. I've been an activist for about 3.5 years. And there's something that has been really weighing on me. And I wanted to share that with you, and I wanted to get like your feedback and your opinion on it. So here it is. Every time that I get together with you guys, every time that we go for dinner at a restaurant, or, our family dinners, for example, at, Easter and Christmas, and all the family gatherings, whatever it is that, whenever we have them, those are like the happiest times for me, right? And you know this, how important family is to me. I love spending time with my family, right? I always have. And since I've become aware, since I've become an activist, I've been to slaughterhouses. I've stood outside of them. I've seen animals coming in on trucks. And probably most traumatically, I've been inside of slaughterhouses, and I've actually seen, chickens and cows and pigs being stabbed in the throat. And I've seen them struggle and fight for their lives. And most people haven't seen that, they haven't seen it up close. They haven't really felt what that's like. And now that I have felt that, I feel like I have a different perspective on things, as you can imagine. And now when I see food, or what I used to consider food, like a steak or a burger or a chicken breast or a roast, a ham or something like that. When I see that, I don't see what I used to see. I see those animals that were hanging upside down, that were thrashing around, that were screaming in pain and fighting for their lives, And it's a really, really uncomfortable position for me to be in when I'm around you guys, because I feel like I'm forcing myself, and I've been pushing myself for the last few years to suffer by myself in silence, because I don't want to annoy you guys, right? I've been forcing myself to suffer through these meals in order to spend time with you guys, which is super important to me. But I've gotten to a point now, and I'm going to share something with you that I really hope isn't going to make you hate me or ruin our relationship, because that is really important to me. Our relationship is, you're my mom. I love you more than anything. And I'm scared to share this with you, but I'm going to share it with you because I just have to. It's something that's like really, really hurting my heart. And I made a decision that I didn't want to put myself in situations where I would have to suffer silently, or annoy the hell out of you guys by talking about, you know, all the debates and all those arguments that we've had over dinner. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to have that happen when I'm supposed to be the happiest when I'm with you guys, you know? So what I decided is that I'm not going to, not just with you guys, but I'm not going to put myself in situations where I have to be at a table while there's these products of massive violence that affect me so much. I'm not going to put myself in that situation anymore. And I want your help and I want your advice on how you think we can manage this, because I don't want to lose you guys. I don't want you to hate me because of this feeling that I have inside now, which I know is different. You know, I know that I'm not the same as you guys. I know that we don't think the same, but I hope that you can appreciate that all of this is coming from a place of love. You know, I'm not doing this because I hate you guys, and I'm not doing this for any other reason except that I love everybody and I love these animals who are being tortured, and I can't stand it anymore. You know, the same way that if Kona were being tortured or you guys were being tortured, I wouldn't be okay with that, you know? And just to be really, really clear here, I'm not asking you guys to go vegan. I'm not asking you to be vegan. You know, I fully understand that we have our different perspectives, and I love you guys regardless of that. But I guess what I'm asking is that you respect my suffering and my awareness of this, even if we see it from different perspectives. And in order to do that, would you be able to, you know, and I'm happy to help. I'm happy to cook. I'm happy to even, you know, choose the restaurant. And I'm talking about like good quality food and good quality restaurants. But would you be willing to join me in those meals so that I can be as happy as you guys are when we're together? You know? And I know. So anyway, that's how I would talk about it. And sorry, I get emotional because, I mean, I'm not faking anything right now. I'm just allowing myself to feel what I feel every day, which is this massive sadness for what's happening. You know, it's tough. And I think that a lot of us often hide this sadness because it's easier to be frustrated. It's easier to be aggressive or angry. You know, it's a bit of a defense emotion when we don't want to be vulnerable. But I think that when we're talking to people, especially the people closest to us, where, you know, egos can really flare up and people can become defensive, I think it's important that we show them our heart, you know, and show them why we're doing such a radical thing, you know. And yeah. So I invite them to, you know, to help me come up with a solution. Oh yeah, and if for some reason people aren't able to or aren't willing to accommodate me, right? They're not able to accommodate my peanut allergy, which is my allergy to violence, let's say. I also don't hold it against them. I don't make them feel bad. I say, listen, I recognize this is a big thing. And I recognize that people, you know, not just you, but maybe other family members might judge me and might think I'm an asshole or I'm a weird person or whatever. But I need you to understand why this is so important to me. But if you aren't able to do that, you know, if you aren't able to accommodate me, I also won't love you any less. I won't be mad at you because I understand that we have very different perspectives, that you come from, you know, you've eaten animals your whole life and you don't want to stop, you know, and that's totally your call. And I won't love you any less because of that, you know? And so you make it really, really soft on them that, you know, I don't want them to feel pressured in a certain way. Like I know that my mom, all she really wants from me is happiness, you know? And her concerns with me going vegan or becoming an activist or taking the pledge were always centered around the fact that she thought that it was going to make me unhappy. She thought that other people were going to judge me. She thought that I was going to have problems because of these things. And when she realized that it was actually going to make me happier and that it was taking away a massive amount of pain and suffering that I was experiencing, she was on board immediately with that pledge when I told her about it. When she first heard about it, I made a mistake. She first learned about it online because I posted that I took it. And I didn't have that conversation with her first. And I heard about it when I first saw her. She was like not happy that I took that pledge. But I hadn't had this conversation with her. As soon as I had that conversation, obviously we both ended in tears and totally understood it. So that's how to talk about the pledge. That's how I talk about it. I want to, before we get into the Q&A now, I just want to thank you guys for tuning in to this webinar and all the other webinars. I do want to point out that anybody that's interested in seeing any of the past webinars can go to amazingveganoutreach.com and click on the video library link. It's in the menu. And you can see all the past webinars. This one will be uploaded there as well if you want to share it with other people. And there's also the ability to book some workshops in your cities. So there's a bunch of US cities that I'm doing workshops in for the next few weeks. And then I'll be in Europe for the rest of the year, and then possibly Australia towards the end of this year. So if you want a workshop, a 2-day workshop, you can contact me through there, and as well as the personal leadership coaching. So you can, I know a lot of people are starting to take advantage of these one-on-one leadership coaching sessions where we can talk, and we can talk about anything to do with activism and leadership and organizing and those sort of things. So thank you guys for tuning in to this one. I do want to share that all of the work that I do through AVO is based on the gift economy. So there are no costs to the participants of the webinars, of the workshops, even of the coaching sessions. But all of this is only possible with the support of the animal rights community. So first of all, I want to thank, there's dozens of people who support AVO in whichever way they can. And for anybody on this webinar now who wants to support the work that AVO does, these are the ways that you can do that. So there's the ability to do monthly donations through Patreon, and there's no such thing as a donation that's too small or too big. So even if you can only afford $1 or $2 a month, please do that. The more people that do that, it helps a ton. And we have some really, really generous patrons as well. So thank you to everybody. And then for PayPal, those are just the one-time donations. And if you do choose to do a one-time donation, you can, if you can choose family and friends, if you get that option, it just reduces the fees that are associated with that. So thank you guys again. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll see you on the next webinar. So peace.